Aloha, champions, and welcome back. Mr. Chambers is going to read another 2 chapters from Powerless by Matthew Cody. Today I'm reading chapters 16 and 17. Like the previous videos, what I'm asking for you to do is A, draw a picture of a scene from something that I read in these 2 chapters, and B, write a short 3 to 5 sentence paragraph describing and summarizing what happened in these 2 chapters. So without further ado, let's begin on chapter 16, Plunketts Story. Well, if it isn't the little fanboy, what can I do for you today, Mr. Corrigan? I'm sorry, Mr. Plunkett, said his fat nurse, scurrying after Daniel. This little creature just pushed past me and ran. Daniel was standing inside the doorway to Plunkett's library. The little man was in his usual spot, sunk into his overstuffed chair like a turtle in a shell. That's quite all right, Angie. I've been expecting another visit from Daniel, haven't I? Daniel reached for his backpack and undid the zipper. Plunkett made no move, but he watched Daniel with a wary fascination. Daniel plopped the comics from the treehouse down in front of Plunkett. Then he tossed the old man's drawings next to him. You can go now, said Angie. You can go now, Angie, said Plunkett, his eyes only glancing at the bundle of sketches in front of him. Thank you. Angie shot Daniel one last dirty look and then turned on her heels and walked away. I get it, Plunkett, Daniel said after she'd gone, and I'm here to tell you that it's over. I don't want to play your silly game anymore. Plunkett was quiet for a moment, and he looked out into the open hallway behind Daniel. Close the door, he murmured. The door was mostly glass, so anyone outside could see everything that was going on in the reading room, but Daniel still felt uneasy about closing off his only escape. Still, he did as he was told. After all, he was there to put a stop to all the attacks. So we're dropping pretenses, are we? The old man sighed. You stop pretending to be a wide-eyed comics fan, and I stop pretending to be a doddering old fool. Good. That will make this all much easier. Plunkett pulled himself down from his chair with a resigned groan. Though my mind may not have gone soft, I'm afraid that my body has. I'll tell you, kid, it's a drag getting old. He shuffled over to a tea cart that had been set up near the reading room's bay window. Care for a cup? He asked. Daniel said nothing. Plunkett winced in pain as his bones creaked and his hand shook slightly as he struggled to pour the tea without spilling it. He seemed so infirm, so fragile, that Daniel found himself wondering if he wasn't crazy for being here. Daniel had seen the creature that was preying upon the children of Noble's Green. He had felt its dark power face to face its strength. This tiny man was barely strong enough to pour a cup of tea, but somehow Plunkett knew about the Shroud. He had drawn it years before Daniel or any of his friends had ever been born. And the most convincing evidence that the old man was involved in all of this was the fact that Daniel felt it in his gut. Maybe it was something in a Plunkett's manner that made him suspicious. Maybe it was simple kid's intuition. But Daniel was sure that the old man was more than he seemed, and Daniel was sick of the lies. I saw your man at my house after the funeral yesterday. I recognized him from the last time I was here. Plunkett cocked his head. My man? The one who wears the nice suits, the guy with the beard. I assume that he's your bodyguard or whatever, and you sent him to my house to spy on me and my friends. Plunkett surprised Daniel by not responding immediately. The man normally seemed tickled with his little game playing, but now he appeared genuinely confused, and perhaps a little anxious. When he spoke next, he seemed to be only half talking to Daniel, more interested in some inner argument that he was having with himself. "Well, I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. There is no such gentleman in my employ. It's true that I have eyes and ears throughout Noble's Green, but none of them match that description." Plunkett sniffed and rubbed his hands together. The matter was apparently settled. He went on. "I was sorry to hear about your grandmother, though. Believe me when I say that she was a special person." You knew my Gram?" Daniel asked. He was cautious. "I've lived here a long time. I know a lot of people. It's a strange thing to outlive everyone you know." Plunkett's shoulders slumped, and he got a faraway look in his rheumy eyes as he sipped at his tea. For a moment, Daniel actually felt sorry for the old villain. But then he silently remembered to himself who he was really dealing with and what that man had done. Plunkett recovered. "Now then," he said, wiping his eyes on his sweater sleeve. "On to business. You found him, have you?" Plunkett didn't wait for Daniel's answer. Instead, he clapped his hands together as if he'd just won a prize. "I wasn't sure my clue would work, but I figured that if you were a detective worth your salt, you'd eventually figure it out. I've been holding on to those drawings for many, many years, and I was loath to part with them, but it was the best way to make sure you were ready." "Ready for what?" asked Daniel, struggling to sound less confused than he really was. "Why, to battle the Shroud, my boy." "I don't want to fight you," said Daniel, backing up a step. "I came here to ask you, to reason with you. Please leave my friends alone." "Fight me? Fight me? Why, what are you—" "Oh, I see, oh my, you think that I'm the Shroud." Daniel said nothing, but his face told all. Without warning, Plunkett began to laugh. The old man laughed so hard that he ended up bent over in a coughing fit. "Well, that's what I get for trying to play it sly, eh? I've got you thinking that I'm the Shroud? My boy, while I can certainly understand how comforting it would be for you and your super friends to find out that your arch nemesis was really just an infirm old geezer, I'm afraid you have got it wrong. I am no monster. I am no master criminal. I'm just plain old Herman Plunkett, old man and fool." He reached for a second cup from the tea cart. "Are you sure you won't change your mind about that tea?" Daniel again refused, but he did allow himself to sit on the old leather footstool, lest he fall over. His mind was spinning, trying desperately to process this revelation. This was just another one of Plunkett's lies. It had to be. "Why should I believe you?" asked Daniel. Plunkett smiled. "Why not? Because it is easier to believe that I'm really a menacing creature that preys on the innocent children of Noble's Green, stealing their powers away in the night." But, said Daniel, "if you're not the Shroud, then how do you know about my friends?" "I said I wasn't the Shroud, Daniel. I never said I was stupid." Plunkett wobbled over to the cabinet against a back wall of the reading room and opened it to reveal a wall safe set in dark wood. He spun the dial a few times and the safe opened with a pressured pop. He withdrew a black leather briefcase. Here, he said, placing the case in front of Daniel. Take a look. Daniel flipped the lid open and saw stacks and stacks of laminated newspaper clippings, web articles, reports. They were all written within the last few years, and all dealt with the same thing. Unexplained, miraculous occurrences within the sleepy little town of Nobles Green. There were also pictures of every one of the supers. This was a file on Daniel's friends. It's all there if you have the eyes to see. Your friends act as if they can go about their business and no one will notice. But over the years, people have noticed, Daniel. You've been spying on them? I am a very wealthy man. I have the resources. Finding the right people to get me information was never a problem. Oh, I rarely use the same person twice. A private detective here, a little bribe there. I didn't want anyone else to get the whole picture. Daniel couldn't believe it. It was all here. Pictures of the treehouse of Rohan and Eric, Louisa, and Molly. Of him, even. You had no right, Daniel said. Plunkett looked indignant and hurt. You know, if you would just listen, you might end up thanking me. All this time that I've been investigating your friends, I've also been protecting them. I've spent a lot of money bribing the right law enforcement officials to close certain cases early, or to ignore certain reported sightings. I've got half the cops in this town convinced that the Air Force is using Mount Noble to test out secret aircraft. And I've got the rest thinking that your kids' supernormal activities are just the pranks of bored university students. But there is only so much that one old man can do, and an old one at that. Believe me. It's been a full-time job keeping up with your friends. What? So you expect me to believe that you are doing all this out of the kindness of your heart? Plunkett hobbled back over to his chair. He scratched at his shriveled, bald head and sighed. Funny you should mention it, he said. 3 years ago, I was driving along a back road near the mountain where I suffered the first of what would turn out to be several heart attacks. I lost control of the car and wrapped it around an oak tree. When I awoke, the car was on fire. I couldn't move. I was so weak that I could barely speak, and I was about to burn alive. But then someone tore the door off the car and lifted me to safety. He didn't open the door. He tore the metal door off the car. Despite the smoke and the flames, I saw the face of the Savior that day. The face of a little boy. Eric, said Daniel. Plunkett nodded. Others might have dismissed what they saw as a hallucination, but I, Plunkett gestured to the sketches on the floor, well, I've always believed in the impossible. It took me a long time to recover. While I was recuperating, I became obsessed with discovering the identity of my savior. I hired men and I began to follow the clues. I soon realized that there is something wondrous going on in Nobles Green, just like in my comic books. But there is also something terrible. Plunkett reached into the briefcase and pulled a black envelope from the bottom of the pile. Go ahead, he said. Open it. We both know what you will find. With trembling hands, Daniel peeled back the flap and pulled out the glossy photo within. It was a hazy picture, mostly shadow, but the shadow had a shape and a name. The Shroud, whispered Daniel. So now I have a question for you, Daniel Corrigan, said Plunkett, his eyes wide. How is it that a creature from my imagination, a thing I drew to scare children over 60 years ago, is preying on the children of Noble's Green today? Daniel had no answer. He was speechless. He'd been so sure that Plunkett was the Shroud. He'd been sure that this was just all some game of cat and mouse. But now as he looked at the little old man in his chair, holding a cup of tea with palsied hands, he saw something he hadn't expected to see. Herman Plunkett was afraid. "Why are you showing this to me?" asked Daniel, frustrated. "Why did you give me these sketches in the first place? If you're not the Shroud, then what do you want from me?" "I gave you those sketches because I'm a coward. When you came to see me, I didn't know what to think. I panicked, so I played the fool for you. I hoped that you would see the sketches as a clue, and from your reaction, I know whether I could trust you. I'm not the Shroud, Daniel. I'm just a sickly old man with too much money who's terrified of something he drew over half a century ago." Plunkett picked up the photo of the menacing shadow. "This photo, as well as another like it, was taken last winter at the old quarry, and the man who I hired to take it disappeared soon thereafter. I knew then that I had gotten close to solving the mystery. Too close. I've since backed off, but I have learned enough that I can tell you now is really going on in Noble's Green, if you think you are ready to learn." "Go on," said Daniel. He had a sinking feeling in his stomach, but he had to know. "Start with the powers. Where do they come from?" "I haven't the foggiest," said Plunkett. "Meteor activity? Aliens? Maybe it's genetic. Maybe your friends are the next step on the evolutionary ladder." He chuckled to himself. "Maybe it's in the water. Who knows?" Daniel began to wonder if the old man wasn't just a little bit senile. "I thought you said you had answers." "To some questions, yes, but not the ones you want to hear. As best as I can figure it, this all started a few years ago." "A few? But it's been going on for generations. What about the rules?" Plunkett shook his head. "I don't know anything about any rules, but I can tell you that this is a relatively new phenomenon. Your friends are the first of their kind." Daniel rubbed his eyes. It made no sense. Eric had told him that the rules had been passed down for generations. "The Shroud," said Plunkett, "is a more recent development." Daniel stood up and began pacing back and forth. This was all just too much to take in. And why should he believe Plunkett anyway? He could be insane, or worse. The old man went on. "Imagine the following scenario, Daniel. One day, for whatever reason, some of the children of this town start doing incredible things. Magical things. Some can fly. Some are strong. Some are fast. Now imagine that another child realizes that he has a power too. Only that it isn't a nice, shiny power like his friends. He can't fly. He can't run super fast. All he can do is steal other powers. He's like a leech, this one. He can take the powers away from others, absorb them, and make them his own. And what's more, when his friends lose their powers, they lose memories of ever even having them. Just imagine watching your friends do all these wonderful things while you stood there, unable to join in. How long could you resist? How long before you took some of that power for yourself? Daniel stopped pacing. Plunkett's gaze was frightening, but Daniel couldn't look away. When next he spoke, his voice was sad, and the fear was gone, replaced with something like pity. "It's not fair, really," said Plunkett. "A child shouldn't have to make that kind of choice. He shouldn't have to resist that kind of temptation. There are few adults strong enough, much less a little boy, especially a boy whose head is already filled with dreams of superheroes. A boy whose dream world was formed by 4 colored comic book depictions of heroes and villains, only to wake up one day alone in the knowledge that he is something else entirely. He's quite the opposite. He is the Shroud." Daniel felt sick to his stomach. He looked down at the stock of comics before him, a complete run of Fantastic Futures starring Johnny Noble, complete except for 2 missing issues. "Who?" asked Daniel, but the question had already left a bitter taste in his mouth. Plunkett wiped his dusty glasses on his sweater sleeve, breathed on the lenses, and then wiped them some more. When he was finished, he answered with a question of his own. "Think back. What have you seen the Shroud do? What is it capable of? And who do you know that can do the same? You have faced the Shroud twice now. So who among you was missing each time?" Daniel didn't answer, but Plunkett nodded anyway. The old man saw the understanding, the realization in Daniel's eyes. That was enough. Daniel was thankful that Plunkett didn't make him say the name out loud, because to do so would have felt like betrayal. "There is one last picture in the envelope, Daniel." Daniel reached in and pulled out the last photograph in a kind of shock. He looked at it, took a deep breath, and put it back. Then he sat down. He couldn't feel anything anymore. He was numb. "If you value your friends, you have to find a way to stop him, Daniel. If you need proof to convince the others, more than the photograph, than finding the missing comics, they were his inspiration. May God forgive me for ever drawing them. They gave him the idea for his disguise. He'll still have them. Find those comics, and you have found the Shroud." It was nearly dark by the time Daniel paddled back home. The normally welcoming houses of Elm Lane tonight seemed menacing in the twilight shadows, and the brisk November breeze chilled him to the bone. He parked his bike beside Molly's front yard and stared for a long time up at her window. "How can I do it?" he asked himself, picturing the devastation, the heartbreak in her eyes when he told her that they had to fight one of their own. He would know the look because he was wearing it right now. They had been betrayed, all of them, betrayed from within. He pulled the black envelope from his coat pocket and stared once more at the photo inside. It was grainy and showed a shadowy figure standing in a tangled thicket at night. Beneath the billowing blackness, Beneath the dark disguise that was melting away was a boy's familiar face. How can we fight our friend? How can we fight Eric? Chapter 17. About Eric. Daniel decided to approach Rohan first. Although Rohan was close to Eric, as close as any of them, he was still consistently the most logical mind in their little group. It would be important to have him there when he told Molly. Molly was all action and reaction, strong, but also emotional. Daniel still couldn't quite grasp the fact that he was planning a strategy to defeat one of his best friends. To beat Eric, their leader, and the strongest of them all. Daniel still hoped to reason with him, to somehow talk him out of all this madness. But he knew that they needed to be prepared if that failed. The Shroud was one of their own. As much as it sickened Daniel to admit it, Plunkett's versions of events made sense. The rules kept the younger supers in line, kept them afraid. Eric could use the same lies on the kids near his age, like Michael, until he could get them out of the picture, until he could steal their powers too. Now there were only a few left, and the only real threats to him, power-wise, were Molly and Clay. Soon he wouldn't even have to hide. Soon there would be no one strong enough to stop him. They needed to act fast. If Eric learned that he had been discovered, he probably wouldn't have any problem attacking first. He could come for Molly and Rohan any time, even tonight. They needed to be ready. When Daniel found Rohan, his friend was lying in the grass in his backyard with his ear pressed against the earth. His glasses were off and his face was pinched tight with concentration. He was so absorbed in whatever he was doing that he didn't notice or didn't care that his dog Shaggy was sitting next to him and contently chewing his way through Rohan's untied shoelace. And he's the logical one? Daniel approached Rohan and waited. Shaggy trotted up to Daniel and wagged his tail, a piece of Rohan's shoelace dangling from his mouth. Daniel scratched the mangy dog behind the ears and called, "Rohan! Hey, Rohan!" Rohan did nothing. Daniel sighed and lifted his foot. He brought it down on the ground hard and watched as Rohan jerked upright at a start. "Ah! Earthquake!" he shouted. "Oh, it's you." Rohan pulled his glasses out of his pocket and blinked up at Daniel. "I was listening to a new ant colony being built under Mom's rose bushes. You surprised me." "Yeah, well, we need to talk. It's about Eric." "Eric?" asked Rohan, standing. He absentmindedly dusted himself off. Rohan had a habit of dusting off all the wrong parts of his body. He usually patted down the clean patches and left the dirty ones the way that they were. "If you're worried about Eric," said Rohan, "don't be. It's all taken care of." "What? What do you mean?" "I mean that Molly and I talked it over last night, and we decided that you were right. You've been fighting too many of our battles for us, Daniel. It's not fair. So Molly is taking care of Eric herself." Taking care of Eric? Just how much did they already know? "Wait a minute, Rohan. What are you talking about? What do you mean that Molly's taking care of him? Have you been talking to Plunkett?" "Plunkett? Of course not. I only meant that we decided to tell Eric about the Shroud and all that we've learned. He'll probably be mad at us for breaking the rules, but his birthday is coming up and we felt like he should know the truth. We owe him the truth." Daniel let go of his breath, which he hadn't even been aware he'd been holding. Then he sat down on Rohan's porch. "Daniel, what's wrong? You don't look so good." It's Eric, Rohan. I think we've made a terrible mistake. We need to go see Molly before she talks to him. I have something to tell you both, and it will be easier if I only have to say it once. Before she talks to Eric, she's with him right now. She was going to see him this morning and tell him everything. I offered to come along, of course, but she wanted to do it alone. Alone? Molly is alone with Eric? Who knew what he might do once confronted with all she knew? Eric's birthday was only a few weeks away, and the way Daniel saw it, Eric would then have two choices. Either he could pretend to lose his powers and his memory, thereby protecting his secret for a while longer, or he could decide that he was so powerful that he didn't need to hide anymore. If he chose the second option, he'd want Molly out of the way. All he would need was an opportunity to be alone with her. Rohan, we need to get over to Eric's now. Molly is in danger. Danger? Danger from what? The Shroud? She's with Eric. She couldn't be safer. No, she's in danger from Eric. Who's in danger from me? Asked a voice from the sky above. Daniel looked up to see Eric floating above them, Molly by his side. Daniel had to shield his eyes from Eric drifted down, the sun shining like a halo behind him. It should have been one of those wondrous scenes, an image that Daniel would have remembered forever. But after what Daniel had learned, it was horrible. His friend was something grotesque. Rohan spoke up before Daniel could answer. Eric, isn't it kind of risky to be flying around in broad daylight like that? And in my backyard, no less? Ah, come on, Rohan. I flew so fast that no one would have seen me. I wouldn't have been more than a blur. I'm getting faster and faster every day. Yeah, thought Daniel sourly, and I know why. Sometimes, Eric said as he picked up Shaggy in a bear hug, you just have to live your day like it's your last. Am I right, Daniel? Daniel looked at Eric, searching his face for some sign that he suspected something. A wink or a sneer, but all that he found was that smile, that contagious smile. Yeah, Eric, absolutely. So come on, he said. Who isn't in danger from little old me? He met Daniel's look with an even stare. Molly, Daniel answered. She's in danger of losing her title of fastest flyer. It's like you said, you are getting faster and faster every day. Molly snorted. In your dreams, maybe. Well, thanks for the vote of confidence, Daniel. But I don't think I'll ever be that fast. That jealousy is just killing me. Well, that's what I meant. Anyway, said Daniel. Rohan gave Daniel a look. It was obvious that Rohan suspected that he was lying, but he didn't call Daniel on it. He seemed content, for now at least, to give his friend the benefit of the doubt. Eric glanced around. You guys want to go to the fort today? Rohan looked anxiously to Daniel, who said, Actually, I need to hang near the house. I promised my mom I'd help her sort through Graham's stuff. Oh, said Eric. Sure, buddy. Of course. Rohan? Molly? Chores, said Rohan. Okay, said Eric. How about you, Molly? Care to do some flying? Molly looked at Daniel hard. Daniel returned her stare and prayed that his eyes told her all she needed to know. Maybe later, she said at last. I might meet you there. Eric shook his head, visibly disappointed. All right. You know where to find me if you change your mind. Bye-bye. And like that, he was gone. True to his word, he was so fast that they could barely see a flash as he sped off into the sky and into the shadow of Mount Noble. As soon as he was gone, Molly turned on Daniel, poking him in the chest. Do you guys mind telling me what's going on? You look like if you just swallowed your tongue, Rohan. Daniel has something he needs to tell us, Maul. Something so important it's worth lying to Eric for. At least, it better be. Daniel sighed. He had a bad taste in his mouth already. Molly, what did you tell Eric? Did you tell him about the shroud? Well, no. I was going to, but I chickened out, okay? I was hoping we could tell him together. That was my first plan, Molly, said Rohan. But you said you should be the one. Well, I changed my mind, okay? Knock it off, both of you, said Daniel. They didn't have time for this, and Daniel couldn't put the truth off any longer. I have something here to show you. When you see it, you'll understand why I lied to Eric. It wasn't easy, but I had to do it. Daniel showed them Plunkett's photograph of Eric as the shroud. As it turned out, lying had been the easy part. The truth was much, much harder. All right, that will conclude it for today's reading of Chapter 16 and 17 of Powerless by Matthew Cody. As a reminder, your activity for this reading is to draw a picture of a scene from what was read and to write a paragraph summarizing these two chapters and the events that were foretold by Mr. Chambers in this reading. Thank you for tuning in. Stay awesome. Talk to you later.